Just practicing. I'd like to call to order the Planning Committee meeting for Wednesday, June 4th, 2014. Please note the gang's all here except for Mr. Durant. He's on his way. Public comment. Anyone in the audience wish to speak to anything that's not on the agenda tonight? Going once? Going twice? Public comments closed. Approval of the minutes, May 7th.
So moved.
Second.
You heard a motion from Abelson, a second from Romick. All those in favor say aye. Aye. That's 4-0, and Mr. Durant is still missing. Consider calendar items in general routine in nature, acted upon in one motion. Anybody wish to pull something? Nope. Anybody wish to move?
Moved.
Second.
Motion Romick, second Abelson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Same 4-0. Mr. Durant is on his way. Going to do a little change in the order and try and give him a chance to get here. I'm going to jump over 10 to 13 for other business. So, Mr. Iwasaki, you got something to show us.
Did you bring the other big? Okay. Well,
We'll just say it's like that.
Project of the year. We got this California Transportation Foundation's Project of the Year. Kevin, Chairman Romick, had the trophy in his.
It was too heavy.
In the city of Oakley, is parading around with it on his pickup, and it went all over Main Street and all that. We also were named as one of the projects of the year by the WTS, and so that's the award right here.
I would say congratulations.
Are we getting
Anyone
a new
else
one?
to speak on this, or we can
Are we getting a new one?
get a new one?
A new one what? This is it.
No, that's not it. No, that's a different one.
This
That's
is the
a little
WTS
one.
award.
There's a big one.
Oh.
Somebody's
Oh, that's-
We'll get a chance to look at that down the road. Jumping to 14, news clippings or court. Go ahead.
Mr. Hudson, I'm sorry. I'm trying to view this online, and I'm getting a play on one side and a on the other. Have you?
We got technical difficulties.
Let's try it again. Please proceed, but I'm
No,
having a
wait. I
problem.
want to make sure that the free cell's working.
Well, I can't get the agenda up the way you would think you can get the agenda up. Hi, Lindsay. Okay, here we go. Oh, finally. It was your lovely face showing here.
Okay.
Thank you very
Well,
much.
you got it. You're good. Okay.
Well, whoa, give me one more second here. Look at this.
Chair Hudson, there's a letter in here as well for 14, okay.
Oh, letter for that's Tessa Air Park. Right. Yeah.
It was
Okay,
all-
moving on to item number 14, news clippings and course. If you notice that there's a Tassajara Park projects, we have a letter from the county. Also received a couple things, Iron Horse Trail overcrossing, there'll be a June 9th meeting in San Ramon. And Route 242 Clayton Ramps projects, if you haven't heard about it, it's coming up. Something like this, says CCTA on it. I'll leave them right here if you want to do it. We moved ahead, Dave, to give you a chance to be here for 10. But when I saw you come in and was on 14, I knew you'd freak out. Okay. Anything else on news clippings and correspondence? You'll note also on Wednesday, July 2nd, we are still planning to hold a meeting. So, regular items, 10.1 and 10.2. That's a proposal for overall schedule, public education plan in support of the 2014 CTP, et cetera, et cetera. 10.1 is Martin, and he's tag teaming 10.2 with Lindsay. So you're up, Martin.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Martin Engelman, Deputy Executive Director for Planning at the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. The Contra Costa Countywide Transportation Plan, or the CTP, is the blueprint for Contra Costa's transportation system development and investment over the next 30 years. This long-range vision for transportation in Contra Costa identifies the projects, programs, and policies that the authority hopes to pursue over the lifetime of the plan. Those are the first two sentences of the executive summary of Volume 1 of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority's CTP update. Do you like them? Okay, good. We'll keep them. So the CTP identifies goals for bringing together all transportation modes, networks, and operators with a view towards improving travel choices and quality of life. Preparation of the 2014 CTP has been underway now for 18 months. In the fall of 2012, we began procuring consultant resources needed to develop the plan. During all of 2013, the Regional Transportation Planning Committees worked to develop the action plans for routes of regional significance. Also during 2013, we opened up the so-called CTPL, the Comprehensive Transportation Project List, which lists every transportation project or program we currently know about, including the cost. Working with the CTP Task Force and the CTP Ad Hoc Committee, we developed and published the Issues and Opportunities brochure, and there's some extra copies of that on the table out there if you don't already have one. And during the past few months, the authority's been working. They reviewed the outline for Volume 1, which is really the meat of the plan. And last April, they finalized the vision, goals, and strategies. So we know what the plan looks like. We have the basic vision, goals, and strategies. And tonight, we're going to set the stage for release of the CTP in July and final adoption in December 2014. And coupled with that circulation of the draft CTP, we've developed a comprehensive public education and outreach plan that Lindsay Willis, our Director of External Affairs, will present to you under item 10.2. So the idea for the countywide plan is we're going to have 3 volumes. Volume 1 is essentially the meat of the plan, and we have an outline of that updated on page 10.1-6 of your packet. Volume 2 is the action plans for routes of regional significance, and Volume 3 is the CTPL. So for Volume 2, action plans of routes of regional significance, I'd like to introduce Bill Loudon, who's in the audience. Bill Loudon with DKS has been overseeing the development of the action plans. You've all seen them at your Regional Transportation Planning Committee meetings, and he's been working with Fair and Pierce and Sage 2M Hill, Julie Morgan and Deborah DeGang. We've had a great project management team to get those 5 RTPC action plans ready. So it's West County, Central County, East County, Lomerinda, and Tri-Valley, 5 plans. And the idea is the 2014 CTP knits them all together. So at the heart of the action plans are the routes of regional significance. And on the wall over there is a map. First on the right is the criteria for what's required for a route of regional significance to be designated, and then on the left is the map. We've actually been through this quite a few times since the early 90s, and we know what our regional route map looks like. It's essentially the routes that enter or leave the county, join together sub-areas, carry a significant amount of through traffic, or lead to some major activity center or freeway interchange. So there have been some changes to the adopted plans. The action plans were last adopted back in 2009. There have been they've added some new routes of regional significance, including Bailey Road in Central County. We have a new idea for designating the BART line as a route of regional significance and the Iron Horse Trail. We'll talk about that in a moment. And there's a lot more consideration in this action plan. And I think this is partly in response to the Sustainable Community Strategy. A lot more multimodal consideration of transit, biking, and walking. More concern for intra-regional traffic within the sub-areas, and designation now of routes where, for example, in Lomerinda, they've designated interjurisdictional routes, so Moraga and Lafayette and Moraga and Orinda. We'll talk about Moraga Road and Moraga Way. And more concern about the impact of traffic diversion from these regional routes onto the local streets. Also recognition of the fact that we're essentially built out, and BART and the freeways are going to have to be very well managed to get us to 2040, because essentially the infrastructure you see out there, once Highway 4 is completed, is the infrastructure we expect to have in 2040. So what we get into with the countywide plan are the issues. What are the issues between the sub-areas? And a few of those are listed on page 10.1-3 of your packet. And this has been in here before, the study of Vasco Road in East County. Tri-Valley continues to have a gateway for Vasco Road coming into Alameda County. They set a policy that Vasco Road shall be 1 lane in each direction, maximum 2 lanes. It may widen to the north, it may widen to the south, but essentially it's going to always be one lane each way in East County, and we want to continue to discuss that and possibly study that further. At one point, we were talking about a major study of that corridor. Linked with that is the 239 Tri-Link and the issue of connecting Tracy to Brentwood with the 239 freeway and transit corridor. East County is very supportive of that. In Tri-Valley, we've had a mix of reactions, and in particular now Alameda County is concerned about the impacts of that route in far east Alameda County. Kind of a continuing reoccurring theme is the traffic from between 680 and the parallel arterials, management of Pleasant Hill Road between Central and La Miranda, and how that works with 680, including what's now happening is there's more diversion, again, from 680 back to Pleasant Hill Road. When we completed the 680-24 interchange back in 2000, everybody moved back over to 680. Now everybody's moving back over to Pleasant Hill Road, so traffic's coming back up there.
Not nearly everybody.
Not nearly.
Trust me, it's not nearly everybody. It's not even half of everybody.
No interrupting, no interrupting. Go on with the
So,
everybody.
one of the ones that it gives us kind of a challenge, and we encourage the RTPCs to be innovative, and we say, think of new programs, measures, and projects that will help you meet your performance measures. And so in the past, when they look, for example, at I-680 and the parallel arterials, they've always looked at the Iron Horse Trail and said, well, let's get people to ride their bikes more and walk, and let's use the Iron Horse Trail. But we never had actually performance objectives for the trail because it wasn't a route of regional significance. Well, now Tri-Valley has designated it as designated the Iron Horse Trail as a route of regional significance. Similarly, in La Miranda, the La Miranda Projects and Program Committee has designated the BART line as a route of regional significance. And what that means is they would set objectives, the so-called multimodal transportation and service objectives. They'd set those for Iron Horse Trail and the BART line, and then have a set of actions for meeting those objectives. So the question that'll be before you, before we get to the July release of this plan, is how do we deal with that? Because the authority actually is responsible for making the designations of routes of regional significance. And do you want to have just a segment of trail in Tri-Valley and a segment of BART in La Miranda, or do you want to designate the whole thing? We did talk about this with the CTP Task Force, which is a group of planners and engineers from around the county, and they've actually talked about this in their various RTPCs, and they've decided not to designate BART, not to designate the trail, except in these two cases that you see. So we have to figure out what to do with that. Any comments or discussion on the action plan, and I'll move on to the CTPL, and Bill Loudon might be able to answer your questions if you have
I was
some.
going to ask if I don't see any lights. This is 10.1 is informational. Lindsay's 10.2. We'll tag team on her and can come back. If you burning issue for a light, other than Janet, you can come back in. Let's just go ahead and ask the question, and we can still get Martin afterwards.
Well, I was already burning on the routes,
Cool.
regional significance, and using non-auto forms of movement. I think it's an intriguing idea, but I guess I have a question, first of all, which is if we were to designate them as routes of regional significance, is there any financial impact? Is there any, can you discuss the impacts a little bit of doing that?
As far as I know, at this point in time, there's no funding actually linked to the designation of a route of regional significance.
So why do we have them?
Well, there's good reason why we have them, and that is so that the cities can work collaboratively and through the Measure J cooperative planning process decide what they want to do with them and what projects they want to have on them. But the funding for those projects has to come from somewhere else. So, for example, if they set objectives for the Iron Horse Trail and then they develop a bunch of projects and programs and measures, the cities would be required to carry those out. The
Okay.
funding for them, though, is another
So if
story.
one area wanted to do that, and then another area didn't want to do that, then they would simply not, and it were an open issue about whether or not they could do the designation, then they could just, the one area could designate and the other area could not. And the only difference would be just the, whether or not they wanted to cooperate?
The difference would be that it would be in their action plan, it'd be designated as a route, and they would work cooperatively to set objectives for it and determine what projects and programs they wanted.
So, but if they didn't want to work
if they didn't,
cooperatively,
yeah.
then they would just not designate it, and that's the only,
Well, it's a gray area because really all along, the mitigations for the highway routes, for the surface streets, has been the trails, has been BART, and they have talked about projects on those. It's not as though those modes don't exist. They work in parallel.
I'll come back to it afterwards. Go ahead. You're continuing, and then Lindsay?
CTPL, a few cost items are in your packet. The project list is up to $11 billion, and the program list is up to $14 billion. We have a total of $24 billion in projects and programs, and a significant shortfall, and that is why we're looking now to November 2016 for a possible sales tax ballot measure. The overall schedule is shown on page 10.1-5. The CTP Task Force reviewed Volume 1, the administrative draft, last Wednesday, May 28th. The Technical Coordinating Committee is going to see Volume 1 on June 19th. That's when the plan goes public, and that's when you'll all have a chance to look at it then if you'd like to and give us your comments. The Planning Committee reviews it on July 2nd, and then on July 16th, the authority releases the draft CTP and draft SCIS, and that's when we would kick off the public education and outreach process that Lindsay is now going to talk about.
Lindsay, you're up. 10-2. We have action on this, so pay attention.
Thanks, Martin. Good evening, Commissioners. Before we jump into talking about the plan, I do want to give you a little bit of background and context for it. As a result of the polling that we did in January and March, that indicated the voters would be interested in a potential new ballot measure, the board asked staff to develop a comprehensive public education and outreach plan aimed at getting us to a yes in 2016. Although the plan that you have in your packets outlines activities through the summer of 2016, we're here tonight to talk really just about the portion between now and December 2014. The public education and outreach plan is designed to kind of be a living document, and we will kind of fine tune it as we go. So we're giving it to you in sections to talk about and approve so we can see what works well, what doesn't, and kind of adjust as we go for the most optimum output. So kind of the goal of tonight's is to have a little bit of a discussion about the authority's goals for public inclusion and to obtain your approval for the activities outlined in this plan through December 2014. The countywide transportation plan process is designed to identify the transportation needs in our county, and it will serve as the basis for a future transportation expenditure plan. And so we're proposing to kick off kind of the public education, outreach, and inclusion process in July when we release the draft CTP, Countywide Transportation Plan, to the public. Right now, the majority of our communications activities, our press releases, our online content and social media is really kind of a one-way street. You know, we put the information out there and we really hope that everybody kind of soaks it up. And the proposed public education and outreach plan through the CTP process kind of centers around the idea of having a dialogue with the residents of our county and really having a two-way conversation to kind of draw from them what they think is important and their vision for the future. As you'll hear, all the elements of the plan are designed to kind of work together and reinforce each other. And I think I need to point out to you that we did make an assumption in preparing this plan, and the assumption was to be as inclusive as possible and make sure that we didn't leave any stone unturned, as it speaks, in terms of getting feedback from the public. We wanted to be sure that at the end of the day, the authority could say, we did our absolute best to reach out to every resident of this county and get their input. We left no stone unturned. As you'll see in attachment B, there's a little bit of a cost associated with turning over every stone and having a really robust public inclusion process. But one of the things that Martin didn't mention that was in your packet that I wanted to kind of reinforce is that we can fund this effort through federal dollars. So there's not going to be a gigantic hit to a measure budget in order to undertake these activities. So keep that in mind, and I'm going to turn it over to Jill Nelson-Golub, and I'm going to use the shorthand version of your firm's name and just call it BMWL, because I forgot to write down the entire long name that stands for. And she's going to walk you through attachment B kind of very quickly with the different ideas proposed and kind of the strategies behind that.
Good evening, Commissioners. So attachment A is sort of a narrative, and then as Lindsay said, attachment B lists the tools that we're proposing. We're proposing to use, and as Lindsay said, this is a multiple tool plan. So we've conducted public outreach campaigns in the past. We've also looked at public outreach campaigns done by agencies, especially those considering future ballot measures in the Bay Area, and decided in this day and age, the best way to reach the most people would be to engage as many tools as possible. We do live in an age where a lot of people are online, and that will be a great way to engage people, but we also live in an age where people still prefer mail or phone or direct person contact. And as Lindsay said, that's why we put together a comprehensive plan, because we felt that that would be the best way at the end of the day that the authority can turn around and say, we engaged as many people as possible in the process. We're proposing 4 engagement tools. One would be an online tool where you could go onto, link through the CCTA website, where you would be able to weigh in on what you think as a resident of the county is an important project, review the project list, and weigh in about what you think is important for the county to be considering for transportation projects. We're proposing 4 regional community workshops where we would invite people to come and engage and have a discussion and a dialogue about what they think is important. We're proposing 1 telephone town hall, which would be basically a telephone version of the community workshop where people would be invited to call in, participate, and ask questions. And then a printed version of the online survey, which would allow us the opportunity to go to meetings, for the commissioners to go to meetings, and for other stakeholders to attend meetings and solicit people's input in person. Each of those tools, while separate, all would work together, and then we put into the plan support for each one. Obviously, just having an online tool isn't going to be very effective if people don't know about it. So we've proposed mail support phones and online advertising that would support all of these tools. So they would all work together. So if you live in East Contra Costa County, you would get a piece of mail that invites you to a local workshop, but also lets you know about ways that you can engage online or through other sources. And the same with the telephone town hall. We would be using online and mail and phone to invite people to participate in these participation tools. And lastly, we are proposing putting together a stakeholder toolkit so that the commissioners and other stakeholders will be able to go to public meetings. They'll have what they need to invite people to engage, whether it be through the printed or online or events, draft letters to the editor and op-eds, newsletter materials, so that we're maximizing our already existing lines of communication through press and media, through online, through personal Facebook and websites as well. And then you'll see at the end, we've proposed an additional optional item, which is a year-end progress report. So those who aren't able to engage, they aren't able to come to a meeting, or they don't have the time, can still be kept abreast of what we're doing. So they'll know what the process had been, what the decisions were made, and sort of just a general update on what the agency is doing. So that's an additional item. But we, as Lindsay said, we feel that this is a very comprehensive communications plan that will give us the best opportunity of engaging the largest number of people in the community in the plan.
Okay. Any questions, or if I can, before Too late. Go, Janet.
Oh,
Well, what I was going to ask is on 10.2.1, 10-2, whatever there, there's two recommendations. I'd say take a look at it. What really has caught my attention is number 2, revise as needed. So at some time, we should at least give some direction. I could take it to APC tomorrow of how we feel about the budget. Go ahead, Janet, you're on.
okay, really, I think I have a pretty simple question, which is, I was wondering with the phone-in, what kind of a phone number, would it be an 800 number? Because, for example, West County is in a different area code than the rest of the county.
Yeah, it's an 800 number, so we would, in the mail and the phone calls leading up to it, we would provide people with 1-800 number, but then anybody who expresses interest or people that we think are likely to be involved would get a phone call right before the event and be asked to just stay on the line. So no one would have to dial a toll number at all or have an area code issue.
Okay, and let's see the other. Will you somehow, when you get all of the data in, do something to make sure that one area doesn't say, this is an absurd example, but have 90% of the calls or the whatevers, that it's spread evenly, or that you just use that much of it, or is there some way to do that so that each area is fairly represented in terms of the population?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of why we're using so many different tools. First of all, the workshops would be regional, so people would be invited to their regional workshop, and the town hall and the online would be targeted countywide. And we'll be able to report back metrics as the program is going of who's engaging, so who's engaging online versus through the telephone or the workshops. And if we need to shift resources to make sure that we're getting an equitable distribution throughout the county, we'll be able to do that.
Okay, because one of the things that we discovered in West County that we discussed at our recent meeting was that there wasn't enough data in a recently done survey. It was fine for if you're doing a countywide effort, but if you wanted to actually know what was going on in that subregion, ours in this example, there wasn't enough data. And so ultimately, I think in a measure, we do want to know what's going on in a region. And by that, I mean, what are the things that people in that region will want? What programs, what projects, that kind of thing. So I'm a little concerned about, once again, doing the same thing so that we don't get any information that we can actually use.
I would say that the main difference between this program is we think we can touch, upwards of 150,000 people through the program, as opposed to like some of the survey tools that sometimes can only touch a smaller universe. So I think that increases the likelihood that we'll get more opinions from different parts of the county. But as I said, I think that's an important point, and I think we should keep track of what we're getting back throughout it. And if we need to step up like stakeholder outreach in certain areas to make sure we're getting an equitable distribution, I think that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Okay. Before Chair Romick speaks, I want to add, this is something Janet has brought up at every one of our meetings, and she's going to stay on it. I strongly suggest, a lot of times you kind of hear it and you go, okay, that makes some sense. No. Take a darn good look at making sure West County gets a good readout, or we're never going to get any further. She won't let it go. Kevin.
I like the idea of the year-end write-up. I think it's important. I think it's more.
No, Janet turns herself off.
Okay. I think it's more impactful as a year-end when you provide someone with a list of everything that's been accomplished in a year and everything. So I think that would be something I want to make sure that gets included in this process. Like I say, I think it'll have a larger impact than maybe a number of other things that we plan on doing.
Okay, Gary.
I agree that the budget should be talked about at APC. I have some real concerns about the message because, well, first of all, my first comment is I think we need to let everybody know when every town hall meeting is. And this comes from our participation in the One Bay area or Plan Bay area. Criticism over and over that people felt they were pushed into a specific meeting. So I recognize it'll be regional, and there can be a message, this is going to focus mostly on West County or the West Cat area. But we know you in the Trans-Pac area couldn't make your meeting, so you're here. We really need to get all the dates out. It wasn't covered in today's paper because there were election results, but it has been covered and will be coming. The county is considering moving forward with some sort of a tax measure, a sales tax measure, to support both efforts. We really have to be concerned about the message going out in these 4 workshops, because I see this is through the end of 2014. It would never be anyone's intention, but I was at a regional planning commission meeting today for ABAG, and people are convinced we're taking their personal property away, so that literally a Contra Costa resident criticized us that we're making corridors for animals to cross streets, and when animals can read, please let her know. I mean, this is the crazy we're dealing with out there. She doesn't understand the concept of a habitat conservation plan and why you link these areas together. So they will grab onto this and change our message. And I've got my Contra Costa supervisor hat on right now. I can't afford to have, our measure will pass or fail on its merits. I have no problem with that. But I don't need anything else screwing it up. And so I'm very concerned. Is there a reason why we have to have these workshops between now and the end of 2014?
Part of the plan is the workshops are designed to be part of the countywide transportation plan process and soliciting input from the public on have we covered every project? Are there any projects out there that you think are a wonderful idea that we haven't included in the countywide plan? So this effort is really designed between now and the end of the year to support the development of the countywide transportation plan, make sure it's comprehensive as possible, knowing that that will be the basis we use to move forward with developing a transportation expenditure plan.
Okay, and that's fine, as long as there isn't any conversation or thoughts of we wanted to let you know this, and as we're moving forward and we have a sales tax expiring, what we're going to, as long as that's not any part of the message. I'm not saying that you might not get questions about that, but as long as that's not any part of the message.
And that is part of why we're bringing this to the board in kind of segregated chunks of time. We don't know what's going to happen between now and 2016. There could be multiple factors that the authority
Absolutely.
could choose not to move forward with going out with a measure to the voters. So at this point, this public education and outreach plan is designed to invite people to be part of the countywide transportation plan process, make sure they're participating in creating the vision for the transportation future.
And not having been on this board the last time we did this, was there a criticism that this body didn't do this outreach to the public at that time to get there, or did we go through something similar?
I'm going to look to someone who was here
Yeah.
during that time.
I was there in 2009. It was
Yes,
actually
you were.
2008, and we did in 2004 we did the measure. But for the last countywide plan, it was kind of countywide plan light because we had just passed the measure in 2004. So 2004 we did workshops all over the place, but it was really for the TEP, for the Transportation Expenditure Plan, the half-cent sales tax. In 2009, we asked the regional committees, do you want a workshop? And the only committee that wanted one was West County. So we actually had one workshop in West County, but we didn't have one in Central or East. And this time we're just, we're offering it up to have a workshop in all 4 sub-areas. And we think it'd be a good idea to get out there and at least hear from people about whether or not they have any new ideas for projects, and that does eventually feed into our sales tax measure. There might be some great ideas out there that we haven't thought of.
And that's fine. I'm all for that. I needed to compare it to and why we're doing this, because, once you get in the B dollar frame, and that we're nowhere near that in this, but it's a lot of money still to be spending, and if there wasn't that, but I can appreciate doing that. I just, so those are my comments. I'm very leery. I feel very strongly that we need to inform the public and get the public's input, but I'm going to be, and I trust you and know you're all doing the right thing, but it's not it's difficult to not operate in a vacuum sometimes, and I know we can be accused of that. We can be in the Contra Costa County, but I'm trying to make it so that we're not, and that we're all aware of what's going on out there. If you forget the county, I mean, there's, if I were a betting person, I don't know what I'd bet on the water bond if it's going to get on the 2014 calendar, but there are board.
She's got an answer for you, I think. She's trying to give you, she speaks
If
Mitch
this,
up.
if this will ease your mind a little bit, it is my understanding that the ad hoc committee for the countywide transportation plan will remain an ad hoc committee through December, and they will be reviewing any of these items before they go out to the
No,
public.
and I understand. I just,
And you're on it.
and that's great. I just don't want the T word, the ST word used in relationship to Contra Costa Transportation Authority during this process. Thank you.
Since I don't see one of David's lights, I'm going to point out what we're looking for at the recommendations. Two things. In the second part, discuss the proposed budget and revise as needed. Tomorrow, I'm sure the same thing's going before APC. It's 12-1, 12-2, and I'm going to relay this. But my feeling is at the last full board meeting, it was do this once. Is that the impression you guys? Let's find this budget number or whatever it is. I mean, we can bifurcate how you want to do it, but let's not try and figure out, okay, we want to do 4 now and maybe 175 5 months from now or something. Let's get it one time, get it in front, what the number is, and then if we have to change something, we'll dump it on Kevin to bring it up. Okay, does that sound about, you good with that, Dave? Speak up.
So the one question I have is the year-end progress report, what's the target date for that?
I was asking the same thing, thank you. Because I don't do it before November 1st Tuesday, please.
It would be in December 2014.
That's a horrible
Of what year? No, of what year?
December 2014.
Yes, I think that's a bad time.
That's a very bad time to do. You're talking about having public workshops in December?
No, I'm sorry.
No, it's
He asked
just the year-end.
specifically
mailing
about
report.
the year-end progress report, which would be some sort of mailer to outline all the accomplishments that the authority has completed through the year. For example, we broke ground on this project. We did this. We hosted
First part of
community
January
workshops.
15th.
Yeah,
Because he's going to say the same thing.
That's
Let
exactly
him, see, he thought of it.
No, I was going to say, I just, fundamentally, I think it's just a terrible time to send out a communication to that broad segment of the community, in part because you're going to have a bunch of people gone, in part because people are dying with the amount of volume of stuff that they get in the mail, and mostly they're going to just toss it away without looking. So I think if you're talking about mid to late January as a year-end report, I think that's a good idea, and that makes sense, particularly given the cost factor, because 175,000 is a big number. I'd want to be making sure that we're doing it in a way that means it has the highest likelihood of being received, read, and used.
We discussed the same thing when we got into it with the ad hoc committee about what dates to do it and effective. I believe honestly, if you do anything 28 days before the election, you've just helped start a fire. I mean, it's going right in the fireplace, that's it. I see a lot of nods. The burnout afterwards, I mean, you might be able to do something by Thanksgiving, but really, I think you're pushing it. It gets into that season where it's just sort of lost. My preference is January, but that's just us speaking. I'll bring up the same thing tomorrow. We're going to do the same exact thing, and if they don't listen to us, we'll fight it out at the full board meeting. Does that sound about right? Do I hear a motion? We need action on this thing. Do I hear a motion to do staff recommendation with the idea of get the number one time, and we'll dump it on APC?
We're just supposed to provide feedback.
Okay. Does that sound good? Oh, I made the motion. Okay. Do I have a second?
Sure.
Okay. Boy, and I just read SB 751 or 157 or 170, whatever that thing is, and I'm doing the motion is staff recommendation to look at the whole thing tomorrow at APC, get it done one time with a number, budget, and mid-January to late January for the
Progress report.
Progress, you know, you put these things on, oh, there it is.
There they
For the
go.
year-end progress report, and it's a motion, Hudson, it's a second, Durant. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? That's 5-0, including Mr. Durant. We're on to 11, whatever that is, somebody take it. It's MTC Freight and Northern Waterfront Revital, Ross and Martin, tagged.
Mr. Chairman, this is really a placeholder for a presentation that we'd like to make to you at the full authority meeting. We do have in the audience Ross Chittenden and Rich Seifel from the county. The county developed the Northern Waterfront Revitalization Plan, as you have probably heard about. And at the same time, there's a major goods movement study going on in Alameda County in conjunction with MTC. So we would like to have that presentation brought to you at the authority meeting. It would probably be a two-part show. First, we present the goods movement from MTC, and then we present the county's Northern Waterfront Revitalization Plan and get your input and comments on that. And if I've forgotten anything, Ross, feel free.
Yeah, we don't need Ross. That nods, that's good, do the full deal. Kevin, that's good by you, your agenda item? Go ahead.
Just quick questions. Were you the ones with the helicopter all day yesterday buzzing my office?
Clayton Sheriff, I'm sure was a sheriff.
No, it wasn't the sheriff. No, there was somebody floating up and down right up and down the river and stopping up there and then hovering over one of the plants that's empty right now, and they took about 7 or 8 trips.
I'm sure.
And I was told it was if not this organization, some other one close to it doing the same thing, working on a northern waterfront plan.
This,
So I
this,
don't know.
this is the
They-
agenda
they were-
item, right?
They were just buzzing. Yeah, they were. Yeah,
It was the FBI.
Well,
it was the FBI checking it, looking in my window.
Okay, Ross, the direction is that bring this back when we're not thinking about helicopters.
Mr.
The
Chairman,
full board meeting, go ahead.
if I could just let you know, we have heard from Caltrans that we did not receive the grant for the expansion of the Northern Waterfront Revitalization Plan. We applied for a Caltrans Transportation Planning Grant, Sustainable Community Planning Grant, and we did that in cooperation with the county, and that was going to be a $300,000-$400,000 study that we would have gotten funding for to carry on this program. We didn't get the funding, but we'll step up and swing the bat again next time as soon as funds become available.
I'll leave it at that since this is information, and we said to buzz it before the full group. This is in Pittsburgh, Antioch, Concord, where is all of the above? Hercules? We can't stretch that far. Okay. They're not in the care area. I'm sorry. I thought maybe we could sneak in a different kind of grant. All right, we'll move on to 12, release of the draft final financial feasibility ferry service 2015 to 2024. Who's got this one, Martin?
I have
Peter?
it. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Just a little history here. The authority was asked by the county back in 2012 to step in and try and work with the affected cities and WEDA staff, Water Emergency Transportation Authority or Transit Authority, to advance discussions of ferry expansion into Contra Costa County. In June 2012, authority staff convened a stakeholder group, which included staff from the agencies and cities that are listed on page 12-3. WEDA staff did not attend that initial meeting, but they did join the group at the second meeting beginning in September 12th, and that group has met a total of 7 times since June of 2012. After the second meeting, it was apparent that there was a significant amount of data and information about the possible service expansions in the Contra Costa, but not everybody was on the same page about where that information was, how valid it was, and how complete it was. And from this, an idea of a white paper arose to pull all this information together so everybody was reading off the same page. At that time, authority staff was authorized to extend some additional funding or part of its funding going into the PDA and investment and growth strategies work that Economic and Planning Systems, Inc., EPS, was doing to pull that information together for us. In the process of doing that, they found some holes in the data that were very important in getting an apples-to-apples understanding of the 4 different proposed expansion routes. And the white paper pretty much turned into a 104-page report. So you have that online to look at. You had the executive study. I'm going to turn now over to Walter Kieser from EPS. He's going to give a presentation to you. You have these slides in front of you on the desk. There's a lot of information in these slides. That's for your benefit and for your reading. I'm going to ask Walter to give you the Reader's Digest condensed version, hit the major points in these slides so that we can answer your questions. I also wanted to point out that we have Kevin Conley and Chad Mason from WIDA here in the audience too, and they're available to answer questions as well.
Now bring them up to the table. In case we got any questions, you can share it. Come on up. They don't want to talk? They're shy? Okay, forget them. Go, Walter.
Okay.
We have a no acronym policy at the board. Please remind me again what WIDA stands for.
It's Water Emergency Always. Is it transit or transportation? Transportation Authority.
Thank you.
Or agency. Authority, okay.
He's never coming back. Go ahead, Walter.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for disclosing that this is not a white paper. Mr. Chairman Hudson and members of the Planning Committee, my name is Walter Kieser, Senior Principal with Economic and Planning Systems. It has been a pleasure to work on this project, although as I think Peter alluded, it was a bit of more of an effort than we originally had anticipated as we encountered various issues in doing the work. I would like to thank all of the city participation. As Peter said, we had 7 meetings and a lot of offline conversation with them, so there was a lot of involvement by the affected cities, and also thank WIDA staff for all of their effort, and I think it was technically a good study from that standpoint. In terms of just back to WIDA, it was formed originally as the Water Transit Authority back in 2000 to consolidate transit services in the San Francisco Bay. And it was became WIDA in 2008 by another state bill, 976. Like you say, it was done to consolidate ferry services and to make a coherent service both for transit services, but also to provide emergency services in the event of some major natural disaster. The WIDA operates under a couple of their planning documents, an original plan of operations and a short-range transportation plan from which we drew a lot of our assumptions about capital costs and these sorts of things. WIDA is currently funded, their service is currently funded by a combination of fare boxes, which we'll get into in a little bit, fare box revenues, in addition to so-called RM1, RM2, which is an acronym that deals with bridge tolls. It's bridge tolls, 2 versions of bridge tolls. In addition to the existing services, they are looking at services in the short range, expanding services to Berkeley, Richmond, and Treasure Island. In the original planning for WITA, there was mention of these expansion services to Contra Costa County, and that's part of the reason why, of course, we're doing this study, to look at the feasibility issues that surround that expansion, because while the plan did identify those locations, it didn't do any financial analysis whatsoever. This is a map that you see of the service, with the green dots being their current terminals, the red dots being the expansion terminals. And we'll get into more of this. So what did we look at? We looked at the financial feasibility of direct routes to Richmond, Hercules, Martinez, and Antioch. And as the study went, as we advanced through the study, there was some talk about looking at so-called interline services, that is to say, milk runs, where they would stop along the way. And we did a lot of analysis and of all sorts to look at those services and how they would work based upon WIDA's current service models as a guide. The other reason we did this study was knowing that we wouldn't necessarily resolve everything, to at least guide future planning for these services, investment priorities, and funding efforts should that be the direction that is taken. The study approach, as Peter mentioned was that we first formed this working group to draw information from the participating cities. We looked at, of course, all the existing funding sources, particularly the flows of those bridge toll revenues, and also how the existing WIDA is financed through its largely through its fare boxes. We looked at the capital cost estimates. We built a feasibility model, a 10-year cash flow model that you would expect, based upon inputs from another consultant working for WIDA, Cambridge Systematics, who did basically estimated the ridership. And of course, this is a key assumption. Who's going to get on these ferries and where are they going to go and such? And so we had very solid technical work, I believe, on that. We drew operating cost assumptions from WIDA's existing operations. The fare box revenues, of course, were based upon a pricing model that Cambridge developed, as well as of course, amount of ridership. Finally, in our study approach, we had to figure out a way to make conclusions that for decision makers like yourself to understand, and I will get into those in a moment. Key assumptions, we looked at ridership in sort of bookends in 2015, sort of hypothetically, and 2035, based on the ridership that would grow along with population growth, travel demand, and these sorts of things. Fares, we used 2009 numbers in so-called nominal dollars, reflecting existing WIDA fare box policies. The routes and levels of service were determined by WIDA as a matter of looking at these as commuter services, reflecting their current service, what they do, and they sort of optimize those as best they could given the ridership potential. And again, as I mentioned a moment ago, the operating costs are based on existing WIDA costs. Here's a table that shows the ridership potential in two groups, the direct line and the so-called intertide. Richmond on the left there is, for a whole variety of reasons, is the service which has the greatest ridership potential. It's partly because it's a 10-mile trip across the bay as opposed to a 40-mile trip or more.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
We allow this, thank you, but instead of going back, because, I'm trying to think real quickly, if you add up the Antioch, Martinez, and Hercules, does that add up? Are those cumulative numbers, or let's say it starts in Antioch, or is this just Antioch to San Francisco?
Yes.
Okay, so, and that's what it says there. That's why I have my glasses on day after Election Day, folks. I'm tired. But was there anything done, or is that on the other? Okay.
That's the other one, yes. So there's two graphs here. One shows the direct line services, and then the other are the so-called intertide. And it's a little complicated. The reason why you have more colors there in the intertide is because you have some odd things going on. For example, you have people getting on the ferry in Antioch and getting off at Martinez, and that's what that light purple color there. And also you have some ridership reductions from the direct line just because of the additional travel delays. These are all predicted numbers by the ridership model.
Again, going back to that slide, at least from my perspective, we would never consider just one ferry from Antioch to San Francisco.
Right.
I mean, well, if the numbers went up, maybe we would, and however much it costs. But I would think that you would make the stops along the way.
And that's right, and that's why we studied that.
Okay,
that's
thank you.
precisely correct. Okay, so the one thing that we wanted to do was to summarize our findings into a series of metrics, if you will, that reveal how we would think about the topic of feasibility. And so we have four different considerations. One, fare box recovery, how much are they getting, what that percentage comparison is with existing services in WIDA, and then a 2015-2024 operating expense gap. How much money do you need to make up to fund the service when you net out the predicted fare box revenues, and then the capital costs. So we'll begin with the first one. Here shows the services from the fare box, the recovery that is predicted. The unadjusted ridership is that's predicted sort of straight away. The so-called adjusted ridership reflects the fact that it's been WIDA's experience that when these services start, they don't get to their total ridership right away. And so so we took basically a discount on that total amount, reflecting the fact that we didn't expect that full ridership to show up on day one, and that it would take some time to get there. So you can see here that the ridership numbers range from a high of 44% with the unadjusted numbers down to 12% for Martinez for the adjusted, and then below that for the adjusted. So
And what are they a percentage of?
these are percent. This is basically how much fare box represents of the total operating cost. A very standard measure in transit, as you may be aware. Now, when we compare these numbers to the existing performance of WIDA as a whole, we have a system-wide fare box recovery of 46%, Vallejo at 62%, Oakland Alameda at 60%, Harbor Bay at 46%, and basically a startup service now in South San Francisco at 18%. So their system-wide average is 46%. And that's compared to the services in Richmond, Hercules, and Martinez and Antioch that is substantially below that number. In the direct line services and in the intertide services, the fare box recovery is a little bit higher, as you can see. Now, this measure is basically how much money in that 10-year period that we're predicting in millions of dollars would be required to make up the difference between operating costs and the fare box. Richmond basically falls within the policy parameters of WIDA. The others are beyond it. You see that for example, in the Antioch Martinez intertide service, we would have operating subsidies required of somewhere between $90 and $100 million in that $10 million a year plus or minus. So that's what we're doing there. So this basically becomes the funding target, if you will, to provide these services.
Now you got me in the habit. If you can go back there, I was going to wait, but then I know I'll forget. This Antioch, no, you're right. I concede it. Antioch Martinez Hercules. The gap is $90 to $102. Am I reading that that's the highest cost of ridership of everything that's on that board?
Well, this is just saying to provide that service, it would have the highest operating subsidy required.
Okay. The other thing that I was going to bring up is I didn't see anything of what Marin was doing. And I know they've been running stuff out of Sausalito for a long time. If there's a comparison on what costs.
No, I was thinking the same thing. I mean, is this, what does BART, I'm calling this a subsidy, basically. How does BART subsidize over its fare? How does Marin, and if you don't have that, that's okay.
Yeah,
but
no, quickly, I had, the number that popped into my head was 50% for Golden Gate, and I turned around and looked at Kevin, and he said 50, so we're good. So
Okay.
that's about that. Excuse me?
Does this represent 50% of the fare?
Yeah.
You're going to have to help me out here.
Okay, coming back to here.
So does it cost if you go back to the next slide that you just had, if it costs, let's just say $180 million, and we, in the operating expense, you're telling me that the fare box would give us $90 million and it wouldn't take another,
No.
it would take another $90 million
No.
to
But this says is it takes $90 million of subsidy to provide that service.
And what percentage of the budget would that be when you say the others are 50%?
Well, again, it
That's
would be
what
the
it is.
inverse,
Okay.
the inverse of these numbers. The percentage inverse would be of these numbers. So, for example, in just looking at that, let's just look at Richmond. It would say that if it's at 44%, the subsidy would be 64.
Janet's going to clear it all up for us. Go ahead.
No, so that's what you're right. So it would take 56%. The budget gap is 56%.
That's right.
We're going to let David go first because he's got to fly. What did,
I was just letting you know I have to leave in about 2 minutes.
we know. Okay. Go ahead, Janet. You're up.
Okay. The question I have is, there was an earlier mention of RM1 and RM2.
Yes.
Now, is that money going towards the subsidy?
Well, in the existing, for the existing WIDA services, that's largely where the funding comes from. Yes, the existing
So
WIDA
what it in this?
Well, that funding comes from the bridge tolls, and it is pretty much, as you were, and one of the things we discuss in the report is the fact that that money is pretty much allocated at this point.
So there is no more money?
There is no more money. The only way that
Okay.
it could be tapped would be to reallocate it in some fashion. But the amount of money that's coming from that source, which is, by the way, allocated by MTC, is fixed by the amount of money coming off those bridge tolls, and in real dollar terms is actually expected to decline over time as inflation occurs and such.
So then I can have another question, sort of another way of looking at it. The question I have is, what is the dollar cost per passenger, say when it says 102 million?
Well, I can't do that math in my head, but when because you'd have that, you have that 250, I don't have that metric in my head.
I mean, I'm wondering if it's like closer to $1 or $100.
It's
Not a dollar.
It's not $1, and it's probably not 100. It's somewhere in between there. It's an expensive. The subsidy would be a large amount. The fare box from, say, let's just say the Antioch service, which is we're showing as a $43 million subsidy required. The fare is about $15 or somewhere in there, that range. And so the service probably costs 3 times that much, so
it's probably a $30 subsidy?
I'm just guessing. I mean, again, can't do the math quite in my head, but it's in that range.
So then if you look at, say, BART, what is the subsidy? I think Deidre left. I was wondering if anybody I'm wondering what the subsidy is on.
Told you guys to get up here.
Here's somebody who knows the answer.
I did some
Peter's got it.
Yeah, I did some calculations on that. So for instance, looking at the first year of the 10-year projection, in the first year, the Richmond service, the subsidy per passenger would be about $7.75. The total cost per passenger would be about $13.84. Antioch, for instance, would be cost per passenger is $76.85 and a subsidy per passenger is $62.52. So it's a significant amount. Martinez is even higher. It's $84.35 so subsidy per passenger. So that's first year. The interline services come down substantially, but they're still fairly high.
As, say, compared to BART?
I don't have BART's numbers, but I think they're right around there.
BART's pretty,
and just as an example,
low on that, right?
Golden Gate is like $5.30. Vallejo is, I believe, around $10.31 subsidy per passenger, and Alameda Oakland is $4.66. So it varies.
Go ahead, Randy.
Commissioners, what we did is we met with WIDA, WTA staff a long time ago to kind of get involved in this issue between Antioch and WIDA, because they were claiming that the dollars weren't there and they had the dollars, and so we inserted ourselves into the dialogue and agreed to do this white paper as an agency that has no axe to grind. We're just in the middle, we hired Walter to run the numbers, and so what you see is it's a very expensive, in some cases, service that you're going to have to figure out if you want to do something. For example, in Martinez, where are you going to fund and get the subsidy for those passengers? Because WETA, although they've got a lot of money, they don't have enough to fund all these services.
Okay, Walter, who's your WIDA friend? We're going to hear about this. Give us the answer.
For which question?
Hey. Go ahead, Karen.
Well, no, I don't have a question because it's become very clear, and the purpose, this is the financial feasibility study, and so we will either vote to, obviously we're going to accept it because I know you all did good work and everything, but then I would think we will have to have a discussion as a full authority as to whether we want to pursue looking into this, and obviously right now, you know, I have no problem subsidizing public transit. I have no problem looking at the overall good and, you know, greenhouse gas reduction, all this. But we're in a different world these days than when some of those other public transit agencies came in. And I know the cities like Hercules and Martinez, and I'm assuming Antioch, have been looking at this as an economic development tool, and maybe, you know, they can get a lot of riders between Antioch and Martinez and what have you. I don't know. I have my own thoughts on that, but at some point, I'm not sure this authority I have severe doubts.
Well, let me do this, Karen, because you're one step ahead. Let me make the motion to accept the study and release it for public review. And if I get a second on that, no, we can do all kind of, yeah, no, we can do it. And just because we're starting to get into statements and questions and answers, but we're going to accept the report and move on with the staff. Do I get a second?
Yeah.
Karen did. She raised her hand. All those in favor say aye. Okay, opposed? We're moving on to some comments now, and the chair won't do this anymore. I've just been admonished. But I would just make one suggestion, if you pursue this further, is to add either Concord or Pittsburgh into any of your studies and the estimates, because to me, there may be some money in the Clean Air Act or in the mobile source funds, et cetera. Pittsburgh just got added to the CARE area, and very specifically, they've changed the compounds and the chemicals. It's not just that, I mean, the VOCs and stuff have risen to the top. It's more important, and for some reason, they're in and East Palo Alto's out. But it's a heavy subsidy is what we're being. All we want to do is let people know the facts. They can figure it out for themselves. I don't see anybody saying, yeah, let's do $100 a trip. I was a little bit interested in what kind of ferries or whatever you were going to use. I envisioned this push-pull thing they have in Sydney, or the high-speed, you know, running around like whatever. But the people that we have on the board and the cities here, they're going to be interested in it. I think they're going to come to the same conclusion Karen just did for us. This is a lot of money to be spending that we don't have. But, you know, if they want to do it in the entire Bay Area and they want to make you a pilot, but we're doing $7 million for bike sharing. I mean, maybe we want to do ferry sharing. I don't know what it is. But those are my opinions on it. Anybody else, and we'll move on. I see Mr. Iwasaki's got an answer here. He keeps turning on his light. I want to call him. I can't remember his name.
Kevin, right?
Kevin.
Yeah, so this all started with the master plan environmental study for the 4 stops in Contra Costa that were included, right? So, I mean, maybe a little bit of the history, because Pittsburgh isn't in that master plan.
But aren't they included in either they'll go to Antioch to pick up I'm assuming it was just residents of Antioch?
Okay, I'm losing control here. I'm just saying use the name. You might do better off. Okay, Janet, go ahead. You got the floor.
Okay, so I noticed that in one portion of what was being talked about tonight, Richmond was included in a category with Berkeley, or I don't know if it was Berkeley, but some other cities. And does that mean it's in a different category?
It simply means that it's been planned for expansion in the shorter term than these others.
So is it perhaps so maybe we should be considering it in that other category, not this category? Is that true?
First of all, it is being considered at the present time because it's in there in WHEDA's planning, number one. And number two, as we saw from the numbers, the ridership projections suggest that it meets the WHEDA fare box recovery standard of over 40%.
Okay. And I can see that the numbers for it are very different than the other. But then say go to Hercules, it's above, or it's not in that it went over to the same category as the other Contra Costa ones. Okay. So where is the boundary on this number?
The boundary, I'm sorry,
the boundary where it's not feasible.
Well, again, that the word feasible just comes down to how much you're willing to spend, but WHEDA has a standard of achieving a 40% fare box recovery. And so if you go back to this slide, you can see that the system-wide they're at 46, and that all of their services are above that, save the startup service to South San Francisco. The only service that's predicted to hit that number in the timeframe spoken about is Richmond.
So these, so for example, Richmond, there's two numbers really. One is, I can't read that. Adjusted and unadjusted, okay. So what I'm wanting to know is if I could draw a line across at the rate that would make it within the WIDA guidelines, what that number would be?
40%.
40. So this is dollars.
No, these are percentages of fare box recovery. Oh, you're looking at this.
You jumped ahead.
Page,
Different chart.
I'm on a different chart.
You're on 10. He's on 11.
Okay.
There you go, right
Okay.
there. Right.
10, that is what I'm looking at.
Yeah, but he was on a different chart.
Oh, you're on a different chart.
He was.
Okay, can we go to 10?
You're on 10.
10 now.
Oh, okay, now you're on 10. Okay, so where do you draw the line? What's the number?
It would vary. It wouldn't be a straight line exactly. It would be a kind of a line through each of those bars, and we just haven't done that. Clearly, there is a lot of they're well above that standard. We'll leave it at that. Yeah.
All of them except maybe Richmond?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Commissioner Abelson, if you go to slide number 9, that is the cutoff line. What they're saying is 40% is the standard. And so you only have one line above 40%, and that's Richmond. Everything else is below 40%. So the answer to your question is there's only one, the Richmond up there. That,
Okay.
So you can draw the line straight across there at the 40%, and that's the graph that you need to use in order to make the
Okay.
assumption that you're asked, answer the
Thank you.
question you're asking.
Okay. Real briefly, just to conclude.
Yeah, I apologize. We made the motion and everything
Yeah.
before you
Yeah.
finished. We
But
got a
anyway,
little ahead of you. Go ahead.
We'll go quickly here. In addition to those operating costs, there are some substantial investments in, can't say rolling stock, you have to say floating stock, the boats and the terminals, depending on how you want to count that. But when you look at the table here on capital costs from the high side for terminals and the amount for vessels, you could be spending up to $180 million of capital cost to build these facilities and to purchase the boats. So that's the capital cost target that would need to be funded one way or the other. We just wanted to point out that, again, the purpose of this study was to point out what are some of the sort of broader policy considerations here, where the money might come from, how you would prioritize the service, emergency service provision, the impact of alternative technologies or other services, whether you should do the direct routes or the interties, and last but not least, what CCTA's role might be. Is this something that would be part of your regional funding or not? There is some money from in Measure J for Hercules and or Richmond services, as I understand it, but it's a relatively small amount. And so there's a lot of opportunities here to look at this more broadly beyond what we've done, but the numbers that we've create, I think, a sound technical basis for looking at those other considerations going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walter. We had a motion and a second, a 4-0 vote. One person gone, Mr. Durant. Anything further for this order? Seeing none, meeting adjourned to July 2nd.
Okay.